Okay.
Okay. Thanks, John. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thanks for spending time with us tonight. Welcome to the workshop. Let's do. I guess we're going to do a roll call. Christy, do you want to do that?
Yes. We'll
Thanks.
start with the council. Deerstead. Downing.
Here.
Gagne. Morissette.
Here.
Odine.
Here.
Plunkett.
Here.
Watts.
Here.
Thank you. Now the UAB. Burning.
Present.
Richter.
Here.
Spafford.
Here.
Swanson. Toom. I think you're here, but you're muted. I can see you. Wells Mangold.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Mayor.
Christy. Thanks. Okay. Well, we'll start off right away. Kevin, we'll turn it right over to you, and you can get us started.
All right, thanks, Mayor. I want to welcome the City Council of River Falls and the Utility Advisory Board. Thanks for taking the time tonight. It's exciting to see this group here. We got a nice group together, and we also have a lot of people online who I believe are also attending tonight. As some could be as resources when we get to the question and answer session, and I'll mention those folks in just a second. Before we go much farther, though, we do have a new Utility Advisory Board member who's having their first meeting tonight, Matthew Burning. Matt, welcome.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yep, just wanted to say welcome there. So what we're going to have on the docket tonight, this is going to be a kind of a two-piece program. As everybody knows, we're probably a little more now than halfway through our hydroelectric relicensing with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And we just went through probably the meatiest year of the 5 years. This was our study season. And we're going to have Lesley Brotkowski from TRC talk about where we're at in the process and the studies that were done here in this last year. Then Peter Haug is going to take the stage, and he'll talk briefly about the inspection he did on our Powell Falls Dam and the damage that was done during the flood in late June. We're going to talk a little bit about the drawdown that occurred for Lake Louise, talk a little bit about sediment, and then where we go from here. So that's what's ahead of us tonight. I think there's going to be some really good information. You're thinking about your questions and comments. So also on the line tonight, I think we have three representatives from the DNR that are here. Cheryl Latch, Michael Rogney, and Dan Bauman, I think, are listening in. So if we get to the end and you have questions regarding the DNR, they're here to answer those. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers may be on the line, Michelle Prosser and Kimberly Warshaw from U.S. Army Corps. I'm not sure if FERC people are on here or not, but there might be people from FERC relicensing, FERC dam inspection, or FERC, the Hydro Administration Compliance Group. So we're working with 3 different agencies with FERC, and they might be tuning in, if not now, on the replay. Also, we have stakeholders that are involved that are probably here tonight. The Kinney Corridor Collaborative, Chart Unlimited, and the Kinney River Land Trust, I think, are either here or going to be listening. And there's many more stakeholders as well, but those are 3 that we've been pretty heavily involved with recently. Also, one more thing I want to mention, Interfluve, I think is a company that works with hydrology and sediment. They were working with the KCC and did a report. I'm going to email you that report that they did tomorrow, so you also have that. When Peter Haug from Ayres talks tonight, he's going to cover a lot of things that are in that report, and it's very consistent what Ayres did and what Interfluve did. So I wanted to mention that as well. So I think without further ado, I think we should get Lesley Brotkowski, who's doing a wonderful job for us, and she'll talk through where we're at with the FERC Hydro-relicensing and the studies. Lesley, take it away.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. I'm going to share my presentation here, so let me know when you can see the slides. Is it coming through full screen?
Yeah, we're good, Lesley. It looks great.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, and thanks for the introduction, Kevin. Tonight I'm going to provide an overview of where we are with the FERC process for the River Falls Hydroelectric project. Just a quick agenda for my portion of the presentation tonight. I'm going to kick it off with an overview of the FERC schedule, talk a little bit about the participation of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the Planning Assistance for States program, provide a quick study overview, study updates on each of the studies that were conducted in 2020, talk about next steps, and then open it up for any questions and discussions that you might have on this presentation before I turn things over to Pete Haug from Ayres Associates to talk about the dam safety evaluation and some of the options for next steps. So as you all know, we've been talking about the FERC process, the FERC schedule for quite some time now. It's a 5.5, 6 year long process overall. And as you may remember, we kicked this off, the formal FERC process anyway, with the notice of intent and pre-application document back in August of 2018. So we've been working at things for a few years now. After that, we had scoping meetings, study requests from agencies and stakeholders, proposed study plans, study plan determination, and then our first year of study implementation in 2019. We did report on the results of those studies in January, sent a report in January, initial study report, and had initial study report meeting February of last year. We kicked off our second study season in 2020. I had a full plate worth of studies, and the circled area is kind of where we are today. Our updated study report is in the process of being compiled. We're pulling together all the reports that were done over the last year, and that's due the end of January. And we will be having an updated study report meeting in February, and I'll give you that date, the dates and times for that meeting towards the end of this presentation. The draft license application will be going out to agency stakeholders by April of this year, and the final license application needs to be submitted to FERC no later than end of August of this year. As I mentioned, we've been working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Planning Assistance for States program, and what this is it's a cost share program that the Corps has that we're able to work with municipalities that assists with comprehensive planning for water and land related resources. So we've been able to work with them on some of the studies that are required and part of the FERC relicensing process. So it's a 50-50 cost share program, and we were approved for up to $210,000 of assistance by the Corps, with at least that much matched by the city. And we did utilize this program to support the studies that were conducted in 2020. Kevin, did you want to say a few words on the past program as well?
Just real briefly. So the $210,000. So we spent about $175,000 on our studies, and the remainder $35,000 was for their administrative costs. So we got about $175,000 towards our studies, and we were able to use all of that money. So we did match the cost share. And then I just need to mention too that Michelle Prosser and Kimberly Warshaw, they were our two folks that we worked with there, and both did an outstanding job, and it was a pleasure to work with them, and we hope we can keep our relationship going. So I wanted to say that.
Thanks, Kevin. And here's the high-level overview of the different studies that were conducted both in 2019 and 2020. Quite a few studies last year, but even more studies were conducted this year. And some of the studies were studies that took place over a 2-year time period. So the water quality study and the decommissioning planning took place over 2019 and 2020. And tonight I'm going to be focusing on the studies that were conducted in 2020. You've already seen the results from the 2019 studies, and they're summarized in a report that's already been, I believe, sent to all of you and also filed with FERC, so it is available publicly, I believe, also on the city's website. So if you have questions about anything we did in 2019, let me know, but otherwise I'm going to focus our discussion tonight on 2020. And I'm just going to provide, a minute or two maybe on each study. In our updated study report meeting, we're spending a full day meeting to talk about these studies. So this is a really high level overview. Not digging too far into any of the details, but just kind of wanted to give you that snapshot of what was done and what some of those results are. So if you have specific questions, let me know. And if you want the full details of the studies, please tune into that meeting in February. The first study that was conducted is the hydrologic and hydraulic evaluation, the H&H study. And this was conducted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers staff, again, under that past program support. The purpose of this study was to analyze potential effects of the continued operation of Junction Falls and the proposed decommissioning and removal of Powell Falls Dam, looking at balancing floodplain risk and the beneficial use of the Kinney's riparian resources. And part of the reason why this study is being conducted is it's helping to meet River Falls, Wisconsin floodplain management regulations. So it was really done more from the state perspective opposed to being required by the FERC process, but it was important to understand what would happen when the dam would be removed. And it's also providing technical analysis supporting a letter of map revision that's likely to be needed when the Powell Falls Dam is removed. For the H&H analysis, they used a HEC-RAS model looking at 30 years worth of flood data and calculated discharge estimates and exceedance probabilities. Within the report, they did also include a climate assessment as an appendix to the report. And with that, the takeaway from that one is that the average temperatures and precipitation in the River Falls area have increased over time, and that trend is projected to continue. Here's a map, one of the maps that I pulled out of the report. And again, it's just an example, very high level tonight, but just an example looking at the 1% annual exceedance percentage for the flood. So the light blue area is where we are today with both of the dams in place. And the dark blue area is showing that flood area under that 1% AEP with Powell Falls Dam removed. For the water quality study, this was conducted both in 2019 and 2020 by Ayres. And this study was conducted to evaluate dissolved oxygen and water temperature. We looked at 4 different locations using data sondes that took continuous measurements at 15-minute intervals. The 4 locations included the project inflow at the north end, Lake George, Junction Falls outflow, and the Powell Falls outflow. And then in 2020, they also added a transect across Lake George to take some grab samples to also look at dissolved oxygen and temperature to see if there were any changes across the lake. Average daily flows throughout the 2020 season were higher than normal against that normal average across a certain period of time. And they were similar to those observed in 2019, which was also a higher than normal year. From upstream to downstream, dissolved oxygen generally decreased and the water temperatures typically increased by about 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit during any given sampling day. In Lake George, the dissolved oxygen concentration did drop below 5 milligrams per liter, which is the state standard for dissolved oxygen concentration in most water bodies. The standard for trout waters is 6 milligrams per liter. So it did drop below in 2019 and then also in 2020 prior to the flood, but not after the flood. 2020 observations from Lake George and Powell Falls outflow do suggest that the flood may have led to a drop in the oxygen demand in the impoundments. Here's a summary of the recorded dissolved oxygen concentrations for 2019 and 2020 seasons. So on the far left in that column, we have again the 4 locations that we were evaluating. The first column next to that is the measured dissolved oxygen range, so the low and the high dissolved oxygen readings for 2019 and 2020. And then the next columns are showing the percent of those readings that were below the trout stream standard, which is 6 milligrams per liter, and the other water body standard, which is 5 milligrams per liter. So as you can see, just from this high level overview, in general, 2020 dissolved oxygen data were a little bit better. It didn't drop below those standards as often as it did in 2019, but we do have occurrences where it did drop below in all the categories, even the project inflow. The Lake George Shoreline Habitat Assessment was conducted by Gulf South Research Corporation. And this is a firm that was contracted directly with the Army Corps of Engineers past program. And they looked at 3 locations, south of Junction Falls, Lake George itself, and then the area that was a bit more riverine in nature north of Lake George. And the zones evaluated within those 3 locations included the littoral zone, meaning about 50 feet into the water of the lake, the bank, which was the top of the bank to the toe, and the riparian area, which included a 35-foot buffer inland. During the assessment, they mapped the percentage vegetative cover, human structures, disturbed conditions, runoff concentrations, and aquatic plants. And these were following pretty standard procedures for shoreline habitat assessments. Really high-level takeaways from this one: south of Junction Falls, the shoreline area changes from exposed bedrock with the waterfalls to more of a riverine reach that leads into Lake Louise. For Lake George, the riparian zone is naturally vegetated with maintained lawns, of course, associated with the parks that you have along Lake George. And emergent aquatic plants were observed in the littoral zone. And north of Lake George, this area is more riverine in nature, but it was still wider and shallower than further upstream due to sediment deposition from the dam that's in place. An aquatic invasive species survey was conducted by Interfluve, and this was done both in Lake George and Lake Louise. And here's a picture kind of giving you an overview of some of the methods that are used to sample the aquatic plants to look for abundance and then also to look at species. A total of 291 sites were sampled, and 7 different aquatic plant species were identified, one of which is considered invasive, and that's curly-leaf pondweed. At Junction Falls, the Lake George area, curly-leaf pondweed was the most abundant aquatic vegetation and observed in 50% of the sampled sites. And at Powell Falls and Lake Louise, sago pondweed, which is a native species, was most abundant, observed at 77% of sampled sites, followed by curly-leaf pondweed at 49% of those sites. The mussel survey was conducted this summer by the National Park Service, St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, and Corps Dive Crew. Excuse me. And the lower 0.8 of a mile of the Kinnickinnick River was sampled. 2 sites were sampled in that area. And the survey found no live mussels or empty shells, no evidence of mussels in that area. And in the St. Croix River, in about a 6-mile stretch between the confluence with the Kinnickinnick River and the St. Croix down to the Mississippi, 10 sites were sampled. And St. Croix certainly is a species-rich mussel community. It's well known. And over 1,800 live mussels were collected, representing 19 different live species of mussels, some of which were common, some were rare, including 1 federally listed mussel species. And the study results did indicate in the report that dam removal would not likely result in an adverse impact to mussels in the short term, but it did go on to recommend long-term monitoring at least once between years 10 and 20 post-dam removal, just to make sure there aren't any long-term impacts that are observed from dam removal. The riverine habitat evaluation below Powell Falls was broken into 2 parts. The first part was a desktop study completed in 2019 by TRC, and then the fieldwork portion was completed in 2020 by Interfluve and Gulf South Research Corporation. And in the study, they mapped out pools, riffles and runs, cross sections, bed material, and woody debris. The study found that channel bed formation is relatively stable with a lack of complexity. And the 2020 flood may have had some impact on complexity. You know, those of you who've gone down there have seen a lot of woody debris certainly move throughout the system during that flood, but some of them was also brought up onto the banks next to the river. Embedment and local deposition of fine sediment in the channel occurred following the flood and did appear to be temporary. The report indicated that pool depth was pretty limited to about 2 feet, but it noted that this was also observed by Interfluve in 2017 when they did their prior evaluation. So that result, they said, wasn't indicative of the 2020 flood alone. Sand accumulation, embedment of gravel substrate and reed canary grass have resulted in increased channel erosion in some select locations. And the flood itself caused overbank sedimentation on the floodplains, basically moving that sediment was moving into those floodplain areas. They said the abundance of brown trout that you have in the Kinney is likely due to the water quality, stream size, abundance of gravel substrate, and food abundance compared to other regional streams in that area. And the most significant factor limiting habitat for birds, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals was the predominance of invasive reed canary grass along the riparian areas. A recreation use assessment was conducted by Gulf South Research Corporation, and they looked at 3 areas specifically. So if you were out there this summer and saw people out there with clipboards and asking you questions or counting, this is what they were doing. It was all part of this recreation use assessment. So at Glen Park Trails, we had an average of 9.8 users per hour. Powell Falls Kayak Launch, 24.2. And the White Kinnickinnick Pathway, which is the area around Lake George, 21.6 users per hour on average. And primary activities, including walking, dog walking, biking, canoeing and kayaking, fishing from ashore, and fishing, with fly fishing in the stream itself. And 50% of the survey respondents were River Falls residents. So more than half are River Falls residents, but also quite a few folks are coming from out of town to recreate in your areas around the project. Archaeological survey was conducted by TRC, and it was conducted around both Lake George and Lake Louise. I just have a picture of the Lake George up here for an example, but both areas were evaluated, and they did shovel testing and visual inspections along the shoreline areas and basically throughout the FERC project boundaries. And they did not find any artifacts or archaeological sites or resources. So no additional archaeological work is recommended or needed. The sediment study was a request by FERC that came in last year after the initial study report. They wanted us to dig in a little bit deeper into potential for sediment with dam removal. And the objectives of the study were to compare the amount of sediment that could be released during dam removal to the average annual sediment yield in the Kinnickinnick and St. Croix rivers, and also to assess potential effects of dam removal on geomorphology and aquatic resources. The Kinney does have an abundant sediment supply, about 5,000 cubic yards a year, and storage. And the impact of increased sediment load after dam removal is likely to be kind of on the same scale of what was observed during the 2020 flood. And one of the takeaways too is just we need to understand and manage the short-term risks of dam removal for long-term ecological benefits. And riverine monitoring requirements are likely to be expected following dam removal. This graph shows kind of a high-level snapshot overview of potential impacts in both the risks and benefits, short-term and long-term, for the dam removal. So as we all know, with dam removal, there's some, you saw the drawdown. Even in that part, it's not always pretty when water is moving through those areas. So there are short-term and long-term risks and benefits that do occur with dam removal. So for this evaluation, short-term was considered to be less than a year, long-term more than a year, with low, medium, and high risk categories. And for time's sake, I'm not gonna go through each one of these, but just call out, I guess, a couple of them. So water quality, for example, a short-term risk in that first year, kind of a medium risk category, as sediments moving down and water quality might be impacted a little bit as we remove the dam. But in the long-term benefit of water quality on the system is expected to be high. Another category would be trout habitat. Trout habitat and recreation both fell into the category where the risk short-term is high, but the long-term benefit is also high. with kind of the lower risk and the long-term risk and the short-term benefit. So if you have any questions about any of those or want me to walk through more of those in more detail, I'd be happy to do that. The decommissioning plan has been going on for a couple of years. So a draft of this plan was submitted with the initial study report that was issued in January of 2020. And planning has continued throughout 2020, and it's still going through 2021. The 2020 flood did cause a bit of a reevaluation of our decommissioning plan options. And so we kind of put a pause on that as we drew down Lake Louise so we could do the dam safety inspection. And the dam safety inspection results and potential action options were outlined in a report that was submitted to FERC at the end of December and are part of what Pete Haug is going to be talking about in more detail tonight during his portion of the presentation. The decommissioning plan, we will have an update on the decommissioning plan in our January 2021 updated study report, and the final plan will follow after that, since we're still talking tonight and working out some of the details of what things are going to look like post-flood. Next steps specific to the FERC process. The updated study report is due end of January, and we will have an updated study report meeting. The date for that meeting is February 9th. It's an all-day meeting, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Given that we're still in a pandemic, it will be a virtual meeting, which is, definitely different. Normally, these meetings would be held in person. So, but we'll carry on and still have a web format meeting where we can present on each study. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll go into each of the studies that I presented on in much greater depth. We'll probably spend about a half an hour on average on each of those results of each of the studies, give people a chance to ask questions. So a lot more detail than what I just provided tonight. Draft license application will be sent out to everyone by April of 2021 for review and comment. And then our final license application, again, needs to be filed no later than end of August to FERC. And at this point, I'll open it up to if there's any questions or discussion. Kevin, do you want to do questions on this part now or wait until after Pete is done with his presentation?
Well, I think if somebody has something pressing right now, it probably wouldn't hurt while it's fresh on their mind. So if people
Sure.
have specific questions on these studies for Lesley, now might be a good time.
Lesley, I've got a question. Sorry, Ben, I didn't mean to jump in front of you there. This is more of a general question, and it's actually more of a crystal ball question. So keep that in mind. But you
Sure.
mentioned that the monitoring is expected after the dams are removed. Can you tell me or talk a little bit about, you kind of mentioned the types of studies. What are we looking at for frequency, and frankly, what are we looking at for continued costs that we need to consider in this total project? I think those studies have to be considered in this total project cost as well.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, Pete, we're going to go into some of the process discussions too, and part of it, I think, will determine, there's a number of agencies, I guess, and stakeholders that are still providing feedback on the process. We need FERC approval to move forward. We'll need Army Corps and DNR permits to move forward, and each of those can come with conditions, and some of those conditions are likely to include that monitoring. So, I mean, frequency depends on what we're looking at. So something like looking at sediment and water quality after dam removal, that's something that'll probably be, pretty more immediate in that first year once the dam is breached. But again, with decommissioning, it's also a multi-year potentially process where you're doing things in a stepwise fashion. So, and again, for something like the mussel monitoring, that was recommended that we just, look at that once, kind of in a 10 to 20 year out time frame, so much further down the road. And that one, it was recommended that it would be a repeat of the study that was conducted, which was about $40,000. So 40,000 times whatever inflation we have a decade or two for now for that one. And as far as cost for the downstream monitoring, I don't have an exact crystal ball or good cost estimate for you on that one, Scott. But I would expect, at least for the first year or two, and Pete might have some thoughts or information on that too that he can elaborate on other projects that he's worked on for dam removal and some of the post removal studies that were required.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Leslie, could you please take down your screen?
Oh,
So
yeah,
I
sure.
could- Yep, thanks.
Let me figure out how to do that.
Nope, I can't see if anybody got their hand raised or not.
Yep, nope, thanks for that.
Thanks. Yep, go ahead, Mark, or whoever's next. I couldn't tell, I couldn't see anybody with the screen up, so.
Go ahead, Ben. I'll hold.
Oh, Mr. Plunkett?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Liz. Discuss more on the dissolved oxygen concentration. How often were we doing that monitoring, and what some of those levels of concern for the ability to support life in the river? Is that just a one-time variation, or I'll let you put in this more?
Yeah, and again, I apologize for the brevity to some extent for these. There's all sorts of graphics and tables in the full report. So for the dissolved oxygen, the data were taken in 15-minute intervals at those 4 locations. So continuously in 15-minute intervals throughout that study period. And again, the table was just showing a range. So if it went down to 0 once because of biofouling or some trouble with the unit, it showed up as a 0. So you'll be able to really tease out and see how often that occurred when we look at the full report and the graphs that are provided. So, and in general, the in-stream area above Lake George, there were a couple, I think at least one instance, if I remember, where even just that naturally, which we don't expect really to be affected by the hydros themselves necessarily, did drop below the standard. We're not sure why. But in Lake George itself, both in 2019 and 2020, we did see instances in some cases where it dropped below those thresholds as well. But it does seem to recover once it continues to move downstream. So one of the benefits that we've talked about of dam removal of Powell Falls is, helping out that water quality and going through 1 impoundment opposed to 2 as well. But there's a lot more detail in the actual report, which will be coming out soon.
Lesley, Mark here. My question, 2 questions, and one was also to do with the oxygen. I didn't see a level, say, a quarter mile south of the Powell Dam. So what is the influence? Because we heard a lot about this during the whole time that there's, an oxygen drop, etc. I don't have to explain that, but does anybody have any numbers a quarter mile south of the dam?
For this study, we do not. We just have those 4 locations, and the furthest south one, the further downstream one, is the one that's below the spillway at Powell Falls. I believe Trout Unlimited takes water quality data pretty regularly. Exactly where they take it and where it's available, I'm not sure. But some of the folks from Trout Unlimited would be able, most likely, to answer some of that question further downstream.
Okay. And my final second question is, you read off a conclusion or results from the mussel survey. Did their results include or consider an abrupt removal of the dam where everything just goes, or was it more incremental? Or
they didn't, to my knowledge, he hasn't reviewed our draft decommissioning plan. We didn't talk about details of removal. It was just kind of an overall discussion on removal and potential effects. And I think he was also looking at, because his survey did take place after the 2020 flood as well. So he was looking at, what was there post-flood and seeing kind of where the sediment was in the Kinney related to St. Croix. But he wasn't speaking specific to any methodology, but his point being more that, the Kinnickinnick River itself, really isn't great trout habitat, or not great trout habitat, that it is great mussel habitat rather, just given that it's a cold nature or cold water trout stream. And it's not really expected to have much many mussels, and that's really, they didn't see that. But in the St. Croix, it's a much bigger system. So even the inputs of, from that system into the St. Croix, he felt was pretty negligible in the short term, but did recommend long term, hey, we want to make sure these changes that are occurring, things can kind of compound over time, and you might start to see some of the stressors on the mussels over time. which is why he was recommending a longer term monitoring opposed to shorter term.
Thank you, Lesley. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other questions or comments for Lesley before we move to Peter Haug? And if you think of some between now and the end, we can revisit. So,
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
all right. Thank you, Lesley. As Lesley was talking, and you go through these studies, it's using a Olympic figure skating analogy, that'd be like the compulsory part of our program tonight. So now we go to the free skate, Peter Haug, a little more exciting, right? So we did have some situations this year. We had an instance with a historic flood that happened in late June that kind of changed our plans. We were on our way. We had developed a decommissioning plan last January, kind of a rough draft, but then this flood came. We knew it did some damage to the dam. We weren't sure how much damage to the dam was done. In order to take a good look at that, we convinced FERC, along with the DNR, to draw down Lake Louise and to take a better look. Peter then did a nice job inspecting that dam. We sent that inspection report to FERC in mid-December. We're going to go over that a little bit tonight and then talk about the drawdown, the sediment, and kind of where we go from here. So, Peter, I didn't know if you were ever tied to doing the free skate, but tonight you got the arts and crafts portion of the program. So, and I'm sure people are anxious to hear what we're thinking about where we go from here. So, Pete, the floor is yours.
That's good. I'm going to share this screen. So hopefully, get my camera over so I'm talking at the screen. So does everybody see this as far as a PowerPoint slide? Okay. So first off, I'm just going to walk through some still images that were captured by the Kinney Corridor Committee, just to give everybody a good overview of what the lake looked like before and after the flood, and then after the drawdown. So this is the lake before the flood on June 20th. You can see right in the middle of the picture, there's a channel that is visible through the water, but it's pretty narrow. And then the flood came at the end of June and early July. So you can see the sandbar that was deposited in the lake after the flood. This is going on through the summer. And this is the last photograph before the drawdown started in September. You can still see the sandbars in the lake. So the drawdown was started on October 2nd. And already with 6 inches of water gone, you can start to see a large bar forming upstream next to the wastewater plant. This is what a view of the dam looked like during the drawdown, with the gate open probably a foot. It was fairly clean the first couple of days, but we'll show you the results later of some of the testing that was done. So a day after the drawdown, the water stopped going over the main spillway, but was still spilling through the damaged part on the right side, which we'll show you later. So you can see the large sandbar in the middle of the lake. So here's 2 days after drawdown. And within basically 4 days of drawdown, there was no water left in the lake. It became a free-flowing stream. And this is when, let's say, the sticks and the woody debris that were in the bed of the lake started to move down toward the dam. So you can see it's starting to cut. This is even prior to the flood. So prior to the flood, we were starting to cut a channel through the bed, slowly though. And then the flood came on October 12th, and you can see a pretty dramatic difference between the last two photographs. Within probably a 4-hour period, the lake rose, I think it was like 6 or 8 feet, and then it dropped almost as fast. Within that afternoon, it was very difficult to control the water level in the lake, so it dropped to half of what it had gained that day. By the 18th, 6 days after the flood, you can see how much it had cut. The depth was on the order of 8 to, I think in some places, maybe even 10 feet of sediment. By the end of the drawdown period, and this is what we call the end because the gate that's on the dam was no longer controlling the water. So the gate was completely out of the water. This was a free-flowing stream again by October 24th. This is in November. Not much change. You can see the channel is generally stabilized at this S shape. And I'll show you one more picture from early January showing that the channel has been fairly stable since the end of October. So with that overview, that's what happened out there on site. Talk about some of the engineering things that we've observed closer up. So in July, we had a huge flood. There was a large tree that came. I believe it's probably this tree that's still, or one of the logs that's laying here on the right side of this picture, and got caught on the right abutment wall and ripped the wall off. You can see in the bottom left what the wall used to look like. In the right, it's gone. That same flood probably did not do anything to the gate, but during the drawdown period, there was a lot of woody debris, some of it like 6 inches diameter, that went through the gate. So either long ago or during the drawdown period, the bottom of the gate was damaged. You can see the bent members. The stem, if you look down from the deck on the right side, you can see that the shaft of the gate is actually bent. And then during the inspection, we found this crack. It's a diagonal crack. Oops, go forward here. There's a diagonal crack that some concern in the sluiceway there, which is one of the thinner components of the dam. We did do an inspection, both upstream face of the dam while it was drawn down and a walking inspection of the downstream face. This crack was probably the largest concern that we found other than the right abutment, which we knew about already. Trash rack was 50% plugged, which we thought at first was due to just the debris coming downstream during the drawdown, but it was packed in there so well, it's probably been plugged for a while. And so one of our recommendations is if we're going to refill this, we got to clean off the trash rack. You can even look back behind the trash rack here and see that there's sand inside the bay that might need some cleaning too. So just briefly talk about some lessons learned, because I think no matter what decision the council takes, if the dam is refilled, these same occurrences that we had in October are likely to repeat themselves. So I'll just point out some lessons learned here is the dam really has no ability to draw itself down and stay drawn down. At the bottom there, our capacity at full drawdown through that gate is that very most bottom blue line. You know, if we want to hold the lake 10 feet down, we can only get to the green line. You know, even refilling to the crest of the dam, we're at the red line. You can see all of these annual floods. Nearly every one of them overtops the spillway. So our sluice capacity and our powerhouse capacity are not enough to handle an annual flood. So no matter what, even with the lake drawn down like it is today, we have a risk going forward of the lake refilling almost every year. And that risk is one of the main concerns from the stakeholders out there for sediment and quality of water going downstream. Another lesson learned is the slow drawdown works well for turbidity, but even that didn't work so great for the phosphorus. You can see ahead of the drawdown, you know, before the flood came on October 12th, we were already violating some of the phosphorus standards for water. And more than likely, this could be a short-term impact just because when the drawdown happened, we removed the fluff layer off the bed of the lake pretty quickly. And that fluff layer is probably where most of the phosphorus was contained. So the coarser sands and the flood sands probably do not have as much phosphorus as those siltier, dark sediments that we were removing during the early part of the drawdown. So the slow drawdown worked well for turbidity, but probably didn't affect the phosphorus transport much. But our hope is that, you know, once the phosphorus is flushed, hopefully it won't be as much next time. A rapid.
I have
Yes.
a question. You alluded to a flood like October 12th. That was like a 2.1 inch rain event. Is that correct?
Yes, I call it a flood because it basically overwhelmed our system. But you're right, it's a very common event. I mean, 2 inches of rain happened in the wee hours of the morning between like 2 and 4 a.m. So a short burst of thunderstorms and completely overwhelmed our site, brought the reservoir up, spilled water, and dropped almost as fast. So this spike that came through the system, in my opinion, re-wetted all those soft sediments of the lake and just flushed them. So there was a moment there where there was no control over the sediment passing through this dam. The flood lifted up all those sediments, washed out, and you can see in the aerial photos the amount of sediment that was removed in those a day or a couple days after this. And you can see that by your sediment tests that you're taking out there. Your suspended solids went up to 3,000 milligrams per liter, which is like chocolate milk.
Yeah. A word I like that you used there is called a bounce, right? We're trying to avoid that reservoir bouncing back full and then draining out again. Every one of those episodes is doing what you're describing. It's a larger sediment release when you get the bounce. So we're trying to avoid the bounce. Is that a good way to say that?
That's a great way. And we'll talk about options at the end there, but that is one of the primary options I think that the stakeholders are looking at us to control throughout this process, is to avoid large bounces on the lake level. If it fills up, okay, but then we need to basically shut the gate and slowly release it. We can't allow it to just bounce and fill up really quick and then drain really quick just as fast. So options for the path forward, I tried to divide these into 5 categories, and there's a continuum between them. So option 1, put that out there, is to repair the dam and refill it, operate the powerhouse for another couple years until the license expires in 2023. And then we would initiate dam removal as soon as we could following the license, the end of the license with the permits. So that's 24 to 26, 2026 with restoration by 27. And you get to generate for 2 more years. Option 2 is to keep the drawdown as it is today and basically do nothing. And we'll talk about the risk of this later on, but there's an environmental risk here of doing nothing for the next couple of years and just allowing this lake bounce to happen over and over. Option 3 is what we're calling the middle road. Keep it drawn down, but basically allow the dam to be more functional in this drawn down state. So fix the gate so we can more easily open it and close it without having to use a 5-foot long wrench. Pull the turbine out so we gain more capacity to keep the bounce from being so high in magnitude. Start sediment removal downstream of the dam, as soon as we can, looking for partners with that, of course, for funding, but as soon as we can, start to consider how to remove sediment downstream. Surrender the FERC license ahead of junction. So proactively go ahead and surrender the license for POW. And then the key on this one is we're going to remove the dam underneath the state process. Wisconsin has a long track record of great dam removals where the agencies work with a good understanding that the post dam removal site is much better than it is today. And I think there's a couple of things that this does we can talk about them later, but this opens up opportunities for state DNR municipal dam grant removal, which is probably one of the largest grants that you have an opportunity to get. And it also allows, I think, a cleaner process of having the state do most of the permitting for this. So before we talk about that, let's finish out the options here. Option 4 is to keep the drawn down, but actually open up a new opening. And by new opening, we mean a large opening. So we have a 6x6 gate, 6 foot by 6 foot gate. A new flow opening would be double or triple that in size. Again, trying to stop this lake bounce. Since we're doing this underneath FERC authority, we would need to have FERC Dam Safety review this opening, but it could be either the downstream wall of the powerhouse, or we could saw cut out the entire sluiceway, but basically get a large opening to stop the lake from bouncing. And continue on, same schedule, but one option 4 here, we will no longer have a control of the lake. So we will have to start doing lake bed shaping and this restoration of the reservoir pretty soon, just because we'll have no ability to stop any cutting of the lake. So we need to start shaping and armoring the lake to hold it in place. Option 5 is to proceed with dam removal as rapidly as permits will allow. And so this would mean as soon as we can get permission from the federal agencies and the state agencies and all of the permitting people together, we would start removing the dam. I think if everything went smoothly, the soonest that you could get this dam removal done would be maybe 3 years ahead of schedule by 2024. So that's the 5 options. They're confusing, but I think we'll get to a table in the end which will help lay all these options out in something you can sit there and look at kind of what's the pros and cons of all of these. We did revisit these options with the agencies, very helpful insights from perspectives of how these options impact the fisheries and sediment transport downstream. The Department of Natural Resources is on a call and submitted written comments to us. A couple of their points that they'd like to make are bulleted out there. Utilize the frozen substrate to conduct grade stabilization. So basically go out on the winter frozen surface and start to shape and stabilize this lake bed so that even if we do have a lake bounce, it doesn't have steep banks that can collapse. It's, make the banks 3 to 1 or something so they're flatter. They were in favor of a larger opening of the dam to reduce the lake bounce potential. Again, whatever this lake bounce control is, they are in favor of that. A proactive sediment management. So the dam and the drawdown released a lot of sediment to the downstream reach, and the DNR is concerned about that sediments, and so they're asking that the city consider ways to be proactive in removing this sediment even ahead of the dam removal. And again, their bottom statement there sums up their philosophy. Any action that's pursued here, we have to evaluate all these risks and sediment management, the risks to the water downstream, life, health, property, all of these things have to be weighed in the balance. So we also got comments from Trout Unlimited, and they're in favor of modifying the powerhouse to help flow control. They'd like to see the city seed the impoundment immediately and manage invasives for 3 to 5 years. They agree that the sanitary sewer crossings may have to be lowered as needed to preserve the infrastructure of the town, the city. And their big concern that they'd like to see is some sediment trapping done, especially if it's near the dam, so either immediately upstream of the dam or downstream of the dam, to help if there are lake bounces that pull a lot of sediment down through the Kinney, that there's an opportunity to trap that and then remove that ahead of dam removal. They've done some research with their consultant Interfluve, who decided that a 55-foot wide trapezoidal channel is probably what the lake bed needs to be at to become a stable long-term river channel. So one of the ideas from Trout Unlimited was to excavate this pilot channel ahead of time to stabilize that lake bed. They also suggested, there's options for depositing the sediment along the lake fringe. There's some areas maybe along the Glen Park access road where we could start to put sediment so that we didn't have to build a causeway or whatever up front. But it just said, consider alternative places that you can put sediment to save your, cost of hauling it. This last table is my last slide. I'm just going to leave it on here because I think it's going to take time to read through, but every one of these options have pros and cons. So I tried to highlight the options that are on the left-hand side. I tried to talk about what are the major cost items that need to be done, the permitting process, the schedule, the risk, and the total cost. And I know everybody's going to go probably to the total cost if you're on the financial side of the decision here, but the reason that option 3 is less is in Wisconsin, anybody can get a $50,000 grant to remove a dam. You don't need to be a municipality for it. But if you are a municipality and you are not controlled by FERC, then you have the option to apply for a $400,000 dam removal grant. These are only offered every 2 years. So you'd have to have some flexibility in your schedule to maybe accelerate the dam removal to fit that biennial program. But if you can time it right, and say this program comes out in 2022 in the fall, if you time this right and we're ready to do a dam removal in 2023, the state has a $400,000 match for this project, if you're successful in winning the grant. So that's why the cost of option 3 is so much less, because you're taking this out of the FERC process by doing a license amendment, surrendering Powell out of the license, separating it from Junction. And then once it's separate and you've committed to not operating for power and you are committed to being underneath the state's jurisdiction, then you can apply for this municipal dam grant removal application or grant. So that's why option 3 is so much lower. Without the grant, it's pretty much the same as options 2 through 4. I think if you could ask questions with this slide up, it'd be good for people to have an opportunity to read it.
Pete, I know where some clarity maybe could happen. You know, right now we're working with FERC on the relicensing, and then you talked about getting to a state program. How do we transition? The council and UAB might want to know how we transition from the FERC to a state program in the next 2 years, Pete.
Yes, so if you are going to generate, you need to stay underneath the FERC guidelines and operate according to your FERC license, and that's option 1. From the discussions that Lesley and I have had with the FERC, I think she would agree that the only path forward for options 2 through 5 are to get a license amendment. And the license amendment says we are surrendering our license for Powell Falls and asking that the FERC remove that from the Junction Falls license. So that going forward, the only thing that's going to happen in 2023 is we are applying to relicense Junction by itself. Rather than the case that we're doing right now is we're trying to go with both projects to 2023 and then drop one out and continue on with Junction. This is, I don't know if it's an early surrender or it's called a license amendment. Basically says we're amending our license to remove Powell Falls from the project.
That's good. And that would be through the Department of Hydro Administration Compliance, DHAC. That's a different department than we've been working with. We have been in close communication with DHAC. We've been in close communication with Hydro-relicensing. We've also been in close communication with dam inspection. All 3 of these groups kind of work together. The tea leaves are saying they are willing to work with us. It sounds very confusing. It is out of the box for FERC, but because we're working closely with our stakeholders and our state agencies and our policymakers, they've been pretty conciliatory in allowing us to kind of choose our path. Maybe that's a little too strong, but they've been willing to work with us. And I think we do have an opportunity to work with DHAC to possibly do an amendment to our existing license, even midstream of this relicensing project. It's going to be quite a knot to untie, but I think it can be done. Pete, am I couching that correctly?
Yes, but the key also for option 3 is that we need to recognize that this is going to be a partnership between the FERC as well as the Department of Natural Resources. I mean, this is going to be a big partnership here to get option 3 to go smoothly. And I think sounds like, you know, everybody's on the same page that the lake balance is a concern to all of the stakeholders. And I don't believe that any stakeholders advocated for anything less than option 3. I mean, everybody says, you know, let's do more quickly. Let's get the sediment removed from the downstream channel. Let's manage this water better and not allow the lake bounces, and work on this restoration and seeding plan as quick as possible.
That's one. I do want to remind folks that Michael Rogney is available from the DNR on this call if there are specific questions for the DNR. So. And with that, I think we should probably open it up to questions, comments, concerns, any red flags, unless Pete has more.
Do you want me to stop sharing or should I leave this up?
I think you can pull it back up if you have to. Let's stop sharing, folks. I think Ben had his hand up.
If I could interrupt, Kevin, did you want some of the DNR folks to be brought in
Michael,
at this level?
Mike Rogney, he'd be the one that will be answering questions. So just you could allow Mike Rogney to answer if he.
And then there were Cheryl and Dan Bauman.
Cheryl and Dan said Mike would be the spokesperson tonight.
Okay. All right. Let me get Mike Rogney in here. There he is.
Very good. So I saw Ben had his hand up.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and Kevin, just I'm also watching the participants, and I see Mr. Wells Mangold and Mr. Gagne have their hands raised too virtually. So if we're looking to manage those, I know it's difficult
I
with
did
all
not
the
see,
people on the
that.
screen.
Yep, I did not see that, so thank you. So let's,
You know,
let's,
I'll try to watch that too if you want to watch
Yeah.
too, Kevin.
okay, let's go Ben first, then we'll go Kellen, and then who else? Scott had their hand up?
Mr. Gagne.
Okay, so we'll go Ben, Kellen, Chris. And then Mayor, maybe I'll let you take the reins back. I'm kind of doing yours.
No, you're fine. You can see what I can see. There's a lot of people I can't see.
Okay, team effort then.
Yep.
Ben, go ahead.
Thanks, all. So as I'm looking at option 3 and 4 here, with option 4 as opposed to option 3, we've got a greater risk of a Johnstown type of flood incidents where we have a major rain event. We've still got the dam in place in number 3, and we have a catastrophic failure which causes significant loss of property and life downstream. Is that a correct understanding of the danger potential as we're looking at option 3?
Option 3 preserves your ability to close the gate. So with option 3, you still have control. The dam operator can close the gate to the sluice gate. He can close the gate to the powerhouse. Once you get to option 4 and 5, you no longer have control over the lake. So if we decide to open up, say, a 16-foot by 16-foot opening in this dam, it will forever be passing water at however Mother Nature gives the water to us. So there's a risk with options 4 and 5 that we have runaway sediment transport. We will no longer be able to close the gate and stop whatever's going on out there. Because let's just say option 3, we do get a 7-inch rainfall. The worst thing that happens with option 3 is it fills up the lake and we close the gates back down, and then we slowly allow the lake to drop back down. I think the lesson learned from October is don't allow the lake to bounce. It can't go up and down so fast. So even if it comes up fast, just slowly release it. With options 4 and 5, you lose that option. You pretty much have to go right away into sediment management of the lake with grading.
So with option 3, there is zero risk of a catastrophic dam failure and a Johnstown type of flood where we incur a major loss of life and property downstream.
Well, you are a low hazard dam, so life is a risk that's not there. The biggest risk on this project is environmental. It's the risk, the offset of whatever productivity is in that downstream channel due to sediment releases. So you have a risk with every one of these that you're going to have to be actively managing it. With option 3, your risk is debris plugging. That dam operator's out there opening and closing that gate. He's got to be cognizant that debris comes up against the gate, shuts off the flow. We must preserve flow going downstream. We can't dry up the trout stream. So every one of these that has an operator involved, the risk is that the operator doesn't allow enough water to go downstream, or he doesn't catch the rain in time and stop the lake bounce. The risk with options 4 and 5 is that the sediment runs away from us and we lose 40,000 yards in a single event. And that 40,000 yards runs downstream, 8 times worse than what we had in October. So there's a risk in every one of these, but I would agree with you that option 1 has the least risk of sediment transport because we basically fill up the lake and we wait for 4 years or whatever it is. And then we have to deal with this again. Options 2 and 3, we're going to have to deal with this sediment transport and this lake bouncing. And options 4 and 5, we're going to have to be aware of the risk of a sudden lake sediment transport.
I understand your focus on sediment transplant here, and I guess my question really is focusing more on potential hazard to human life if we were to have a catastrophic dam failure and have a 10-foot wall of water suddenly cascading down the channel. And I understand that there may only be one house that I know of that's going to be impacted with this, and a bridge, maybe some people on the St. Croix. I just wanted to look a little further at that risk of the catastrophic failure if we do retain limited flow. And then sort of a follow-up on that, is that the reason why if we do open that up under the option 4 and 5 that we won't be eligible at all for that $400,000 DNR grant?
Yes, so you need to be out from under the FERC regulation. So you cannot be a hydropower facility. Hydropower facilities that are regulated by the FERC are excluded from the state municipal dam grant.
Okay, but so under option 4, we would be eligible for that $400,000 grant still?
No, in order to get that $400,000 grant, you need to surrender the dam up front. You can't continue. So option 4, so the issue with option 4 is in order to make this opening to the dam, probably the route you're going to have to take is the federal government will approve the changes that you make to the dam. So the state right now doesn't regulate this dam. Dam safety on this dam right now is regulated by FERC. So option 4, the FERC would approve the opening, and you would basically still be under FERC control. I mean, there's maybe a continuum here of multiple paths that you could go ahead with surrendering this license. But I think the earlier you surrender this, that's your ticket, because you got to get through the whole process of the license amendment, which I believe Lesley can comment, but I believe it's like 14 months or 20 months.
Yeah, there's no defined process for a FERC amendment. It's not like licensing where there's a defined timeline, but you know, our estimate is it could take about a year, plus or minus, to get a FERC amendment approved. But excuse me, that said, there are steps that we could kind of do in the interim in the amendment application. For example, if we did option number 3, we could apply within that amendment application that we wanted to pull the turbine yet this summer, even ahead of the full approval for surrender application. And, you know, just to reiterate too on the question of if the DNR grant would be an option in the FERC process. So if you're doing basically any act of not refilling the lake and generating hydropower at this point is considered an act of decommissioning by FERC. So decommissioning can look like different things. You could decommission with your dam in place. Decommission just means you're not generating power anymore. Or you can decommission with the intent of dam removal and a process thereof. But if we're doing something essentially to take out a wall of the powerhouse, that has to be approved by FERC dam safety. And then that by itself would still be under the regulation of FERC just because of the extent of that process, which kind of bumps us out of that DNR grant option. And, you know, perhaps, you know, either Pete or Mike or someone from DNR can speak more to that specific, but that's kind of how we interpreted it. So that's why we only have that DNR grant option under number 3. So it's a lot of nuances there, but it's dealing with a few different agencies and different regulations and different hypotheticals.
Thank you.
I have 2 real quick things. So one, we kind of brushed over it, Pete, that after you did your inspection of the dam, I just want to be clear and get it on the public record that that dam is not, there's no imminent danger of failure, catastrophic failure today. Pete, is that correct?
Yes, so that is correct. There's some conditions with that. So the FERC right now says they don't want ice pressures building up against the top of the dam. So if you have that cut over there, you're going to have to repair the cut. And the FERC even said, even if it's sandbagging it, right, you have to repair the cut. So the part of the dam that's damaged needs to be blocked off so that free-flowing water can keep the ice off the rest of the dam. But the FERC also said, you know, sluice gate, I'd like to see that back up and operable. Clean the trash rack, because the trash rack failure is one of the most common causes of turbine damage anyway. So all of that debris would come in and block the turbine. So The dam is not going to fail in a catastrophic manner based on what the flood is, as long as we can keep the ice off the top of the dam. And so there's a range of options there.
Okay, that's good. I wanted to get that out there. And then two, Ben, I just want you to be aware too. So we were just required about 18 months ago to complete an emergency action plan. It is fairly robust in case there is a catastrophic failure of the dam. So we have assessed all structures and bridges and chain of command if there is a catastrophic failure of the dam. So we do have that emergency action plan in place as well if there's a catastrophic event. So let's go to Kellen, I guess, with the next question. Kellen?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for all the information. That was really great, Pete, all the time that you put into that. I really just have a couple questions that I was thinking of as I was listening to this. Looking at that DNR grant, the $400,000 dam removal grant, and maybe I just missed this, but how many, I guess, cities apply for those, and then how many are awarded? And then my other question is just a general one of looking at those recommendations from those stakeholders of the DNR, and then also Trout Unlimited. You know, they had a list of recommendations that they would like to see. In any discussions that you had with them, maybe Kevin, do you know if they're willing to put forth finances to assist with those recommendations to make them happen, or is that something that the city and ultimately the ratepayers are going to have to absorb?
Could you restate the last two sentences of your question again, Kellen, so I have it clear?
Yeah, so looking at the recommendations from the DNR and Trout Unlimited, you know, there was a list of things that they would like to see after the dam is removed, or, you know, even beforehand. Do you know, in any of your conversations, have they offered up any money to help with those recommendations, or is that something that's going to be put back onto the city and ultimately the ratepayer?
Kellen, no, they have not. We have not seen any grants or funding yet. Hal's going to chime in on that. But with that said, I think there is some olive branches out there to do some work. So, Hal, why don't you finish that, since you might be closer to it?
Yeah, I have had some conversations with, well, I've definitely had conversations with the Corridor Collaborative, as well as Trout Unlimited. They are excited, I think, to go for monies once a decision is made. So basically, they're waiting for us to make this decision in order for them to be able to go to funders and go to the legislature as well, and the executive branch, and begin to really push for some big money to come in around this plan. But they're counting on us to, you know, well, what I've been told is that, you know, if we go with an option that allows that does keep the lake drawn down, and we manage this bounce, you know, and or, you know, have an intent to manage the bounce and the sediment, you know, then kind of that opens the doors for them to go out and say, okay, we need a sediment management plan. We need some money to help us fix the sluice gates, or you know, or to pull out the you know, particular piece of machinery. But until we make a decision to do that, they can't go out and ask for that kind of money. So it's kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. But there are millions of dollars available when you start looking at the legislature, especially, and you know, we can get potentially all of the money we need to remove the dam, you know, in the time period that we've decided on already, through potentially a legislative action, and have that money set aside. The sooner, you know, so if we decide to, you know, that we go down this road with keeping the
the dam drawn down, my understanding is that that's just going to open the door on being able to go to the legislature, being able to go to the governor's office, being able to go to the DNR, being able to go to Army Corps of Engineers, and because the decision's been made. So I think that's why no one is saying, oh yeah, we got $100,000 in our back pocket right now. But we do know that the DNR option is on the table, and everybody's been excited about that. So that's at least a starting point.
Hell, that reminded me too. I forgot to mention that, but the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, because they've had a good experience with us these past 2 years, they're going to spend $100,000 this summer studying whether or not they can help fund dam removal. So if they can show there's enough benefit to removing that dam to the environmental area, they then may be able to help fund some of that dam removal. So they're going to spend $100,000 in the study this summer to see if they can be involved. So the U.S. Army Corps is already dipping their toe in the water, no pun intended.
Back to the first question though, do you know how many of those grants are available, those $400,000 grants, Pete? And then how many, I guess, cities or municipalities apply for those?
Sure, I think so. The governor's biennial budget has been funded, I believe, every 2 years since at least 2010, to the max. Some years there's been like 44 applicants. So there's two different categories though. The first are municipal dam repairs, and that is very competitive. And then the second is municipal dam removals, and that is not as competitive. In fact, I think there may have been less than 5 projects that have had to compete for the municipal dam removal versus the municipal dam repairs. They may award 22 out of 40, or they may award 15 out of 30, but we are looking at the removal pot. There's a certain amount of the state's budget for this DNR program that's allocated for removals, and that is, I think, a much less competitive field than the dam repairs. So I think your odds are, if I was a betting man, it's above 70% of getting the full 400.
Hey Pete, maybe this is Mike Rogney. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yes.
So I'm Mike Rogney. I'm the dam safety and floodplain engineer with the DNR. I'm out of the Eau Claire office. So I figured I would chime in a little bit and maybe describe the grant stuff a little more too. So as you've all heard, for a dam that's regulated under Chapter 31, the statutes, they are eligible if it's owned by a municipality, and that can be a lake district, that can be a village, city, county, entities like that. If they're owned by that, then they may be eligible for the municipal dam grant. A dam removal grant can cover all municipalities and private dam owners as well. So since obviously it's City of River Falls, you'd be eligible for the municipal dam grant, and that includes removal too. And so if you decide to apply for a dam removal grant, you can use the municipal dam grant to cover that. So it could be more than the $50,000 that we would allocate, to, let's say, a private dam owner. And so the municipal dam grant covers 50% up to $400,000. And then the next $400,000, they cover 25% of it. And then the next, and so basically the total project cost can be $1.2 million. But the grant only covers a certain percentage of certain amounts. So like I said, 50% of the first 400,000, and then 25% of the next 800,000, basically. Total project 1.2 million. So that could be an avenue that could be used if somehow the dam went under Chapter 31 jurisdiction, and then he'd be working with me for a plan approval and permitting stuff to get the dam removed and everything instead of the FERC. And as Pete said, it can, in the last couple budget cycles, it has been very competitive. Especially the municipal dam grant. I don't have the exact numbers of amount of applicants, but it was very competitive, and we had to turn away questions I turn away, but there's a lot of communities that were not able to get funding because of, you know, how competitive it was. I mean, there's the review process of all the grant applications is very strenuous and takes a long time. And, you know, you take a look at the hazards, you take a look at all sorts of things when deciding what types of projects and stuff can be funded. And each budget cycle, typically the amount that's allocated is about 4 million. And of that 4 million-ish, about 500,000 is typically used for the dam removal grant. And so there is a threshold with that too. And even this year, I think we're, with the amount of dam removal grants applications that came in, we're actually reaching that threshold where we almost don't have much left in the budget at all. So if somebody came in and applied for a dam removal grant, it's been so popular this year that we may not be able to have funds for it. And anybody at any time can apply for the dam removal grant, as long as there's still funds available. So we always recommend that if somebody does want to remove a dam, that they apply as soon as possible, because typically it's first come, first serve. But that dam, the municipal dam grant is every budget cycle, so every 2 years, which I guess would be the next one. Is it 2021? I can't remember, or 2022 maybe. Yeah, 2022 would be the next one. And, you know, there's always the chance some funds may not be allocated, I guess, too. So, but typically we have seen it the last budget cycle that $3.5 to $4 million allocated by the legislature for that.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah. Chris Gagne has had his hand up for a while. He's probably going to sleep if we've not answered your question yet, Chris Gagne.
Well, I grabbed my pillow and my blanket and got comfortable, so I was just getting close. One of my questions was exactly what was asked for. Has any of the stakeholders that have really kind of stepped up early in this whole process kind of come forward and shown any money or any interest in funding any of these projects or supporting funding? And I think you guys gave a great answer on that, so I appreciate that. I think my question might be for Lesley, but anybody that's on the call that would be able to step in, what is the earliest that we could get an amendment and remove Powell out of that agreement? That way we could get the DNR moving on that process if we wanted to get that going earlier.
Yeah, with the FERC amendment process, there is no guaranteed timeline ever. Our best guess is that it would probably take about a year to get full approval for whatever that amendment application looks like. And remember, an amendment basically would be needed for anything short of repair and refill. And with the different options that Pete went through, there's certainly different iterations thereof. But on average, it's probably, my best guess would be a year. It could be a couple months more, it could be a couple months less. But we've been working very closely with FERC, certainly in the relicensing, and also, you know, since the flood and the need for the dam safety evaluation, we've also been working closely with FERC Dam Safety and DHAC with licensing. We've had all three of those branches on a couple of different calls this fall, so they're all very much aware of what we're talking about, what we're going through, and the options that are under consideration. And there would be options as well too, as far as most likely we need to verify this with DHAC, but it seems like there would be an option. Again, if we needed to do something, you know, timeline-wise, if we're trying to get something done this summer to pull out the turbine sooner than later to try to control that bounce, it's possible that FERC could approve that one piece of it prior to the overall amendment application. But if we're looking at something like option 4, where we're proposing to take out, you know, a wall of the powerhouse, something like that's likely to take longer and need some dam safety reviews as well. So it really depends on what's in that application and what else they have on their plates at the time.
So really the best estimate is about a year, and getting that pushed half that or even less is probably out of the question.
You know, you never know. It really depends on their workload. I've had them, you know, turn some things around very quickly, and other things that, you know, seem like maybe it could be pretty routine, and maybe it's workload, or maybe it's back burner because it is so routine and not a hot button issue. It, you know, can take a long time. So again, it's, you know, what we will do regardless of what option is make sure we're working closely with FERC and that they understand the timeline requested. FERC made it clear that the timeline is ours to propose if we're doing this. We can propose when we want to do the dam removal and what that process would look like. And, you know, in this case, if we wanted to do that through DNR, essentially our application to FERC would be, surrender the license and do removal through the state agency instead, which could possibly speed up the approval, but none of us are FERC, so we can't speak for them specifically on timeline.
Absolutely. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Hal.
This is a question for the DNR representative. If we had submitted an amendment application to relinquish the lower dam from the license process, would that indication be enough for us to move ahead with an application for the DNR grant option, even if that hadn't been approved already? Just trying to think of ways to continue to move this along.
That's a tough one. I think we could definitely work with you, knowing that you're going forward with, trying to get the removal under the Chapter 31 jurisdiction. I guess I've just never run into that before, with it, and I think we would want to know for sure that the actual license was being surrendered and that it was Chapter 31 jurisdiction, because there is still that risk of FERC not allowing that as well. So it's tough, I think, for me to answer that at that time, but I think we would definitely work with you, to at least get the process going, knowing what the intent is.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Diane.
Just playing devil's advocate a little here. Is there any reason for us not to try to get the Powell Dam out from under FERC as quickly as possible?
Peter, Lesley, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yes, I don't see an advantage of staying underneath the FERC license unless the city is absolutely committed to staying with the generation path. And to me, if it's not option one, then every path, I'm sure Lesley said it, every path goes through a license amendment if it's not option one. And the question is, how quickly do you want to get out from underneath the FERC license? I think the license amendment leading to the Chapter 31 jurisdiction by the state, to me, is a no-brainer. I mean, there's 3 projects that were awarded last year for, it was 2 $400,000 projects and one that was $193,000 match for dam removals on the state. So the state is obviously committing a lot of funds, $4 million last cycle to these projects. I think it's a great grant and a great opportunity.
It sounds like an impressive opportunity, and my guess is that if we didn't get it the first cycle that we applied for it, we could certainly reapply. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
okay.
Correct.
So in that scenario, we could continue to manage the silt, manage the sediment as best we can, but under DNR authority rather than FERC.
Yeah, the issue here is, again, it's set on this cycle, so it looks like. Right. Mike was right. It's 2022 to 2023 is the next construction window. And then 2024 to 2025 is the next construction window. You apply usually a few months ahead of that. So I just think the city, you've got to be aware that you may have to go quicker than you thought on the dam removal in order to get the first grant opportunity.
So I have a question.
That said, I think, with the DNR grant option, I think, you still have flexibility in the timeline. So if you were to decommission and surrender through FERC and say, basically in our initial application, the path we were going on, is we were proposing a certain date for decommissioning, removal, and restoration. And if you're, I think once that's in a FERC order, they're going to expect you to meet that. And, if you're working with DNR, not that they won't expect you to meet that, but I think there might be a little bit more flexibility. Do you apply for the first grant window? Do you apply for the second? I think there's nothing that says that, once you decommission and surrender with FERC, that doesn't mean that you have to then start dam removal right away with DNR. You can still wait into that original timeline if you want to. That's up to you guys as far as what timeline you want to work through. You know, within the parameters of the grant and staff time and permit approvals and everything else with DNR and Corps.
Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Go ahead, Chris.
So let's just say we remove the FERC regulation of this, which we've obviously had been working relationships with up to this point. What if we remove that in the DNR? What are the cons, the negatives, detractors that come from this of giving DNR control over this versus, you know, just staying where we're at and staying the course? I mean, is there any like rugs that the DNR can pull out from underneath us? Can they force us to remove that earlier because of all that sediment that might flow down the river in a new flood? What negatives can come from giving DNR control?
I don't think it's a matter of control. The DNR is obviously has a vested interest in maintaining the resource. And so regardless of whether you're underneath the FERC license or not, they're advocates for protecting that resource downstream. And so I think it behooves you as the city to do all that you can to maintain a good relationship there, because they do have the authority to fine you and to force you to do things, even if you are underneath FERC jurisdiction. So the nice thing about option 3 is it's like a perfect pairing, right? I mean, everybody wants this good ending of this project. And to me, getting that $400,000 match, and then, you know, even if you have to spend a little bit more on sediment management up front, I mean, to maintain that good neighbor relationship is key. And I think it's a good opportunity here. The risk is that there is a process here, right, Lesley, where you would be not eligible for the grant because you would maintain the removal process through the FERC, right? And so originally what we were actually planning on doing was decommissioning and removing this dam under the FERC authority. So we would have been ineligible.
So outside of the $400,000, I guess I go back to the main question. I'm in total agreement with you. I don't want to see all this sediment going downstream. I've talked to many folks that are down there fishing, and how this initial drawdown has affected downstream and how that a flood. One guy walked up to me and said, "Have you seen it?" And I mean, he's very passionate about it. And I said, "I haven't yet. I'm on my way down right now." And I walked down and kind of took a look at some of that. And obviously, I'm no professional in that area. Can only go off of what you guys are saying and some of the research, right? I guess the big thing there is I don't want to see it going downstream either. But if we pull our current process out and remove FERC, what does that do as far as giving the DNR that control? I mean, that's really what it would be, is giving control over this process, and they could come pull that rug out from us earlier and say, nope, you need to pull it out earlier. Can they do that? I mean, if we're giving them that kind of leverage.
Michael, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, speak for the DNR's perspective on that one.
Yeah, so I'm thinking just, you know, let's say if once the dam reverts back to Chapter 31 jurisdiction, that basically means that the dam is now subject to the dam safety, the state of Wisconsin DNR dam safety program, right? So there may, I mean, we have our requirements such as capacity inspections, emergency action plans, things like that. So let's say if there's something that may not be done to meet our regs, then that may need to be done, you know, to meet compliance with Chapter 31 or NR 333, which is our administrative code for it, right? And you know, let's say so the next grant cycle is the 2022 2023 or building cycle, but it starts July 2021, right? Let's say if the city applies, turns up, you know, wasn't competitive enough, didn't get it. Well, again, the dam would still be subject to Chapter 31 requirements. So that may include certain inspections. And let's say if an inspection needs to be done, and let's say if, you know, in that we identifying more deficiencies or something like that. Again, this is hypothetical. What we do with these inspections is we issue concurrences, and in those concurrences, we would sign directives saying that it would need to be fixed by this time and this date, right? So we would still want to see things moving forward to ensure the structural integrity, in the interest of life, health, and property of the dam, right? Not just leave it sit there until you're able to get the grant, or every 2 years or something. So I think that's pretty much the crux of it, is that it would still fall underneath the Chapter 31 jurisdiction, and we'd be working with you to make sure that if the dam is still there, well, we would want to make sure that it's safe, reliable, has the structural integrity and isn't a threat to life, health, or property. So I'm just thinking, what would happen with it if it were under 31 jurisdiction?
I've got a couple things to add. One right to that, Michael. So FERC does that exact same thing right now. That's why we did the dam inspection. So, and FERC is going to require us to keep that dam safe as well, just as a DNR would. So those are really parallel type agencies requiring us to do parallel type things. So the FERC isn't going to allow an unsafe dam, either is the DNR. They're going to inspect it. We just did an inspection. Now they're requiring us to do some things to make sure it's shored up. That's one thing I wanted to see. Two, I want to come back a little bit. Lesley Brotkowski, you've kept a good poker face over there, but Lesley Brotkowski with TRC is the one who brought up this route of using DHAC in the very beginning. Instead of going this FERC Hydro-relicensing route that we're on, she says, hey, why don't we approach DHAC and see if we can just amend our existing license and then do it that way. Well, now we've almost come full circle, because we did have that discussion before, and now we're recommending that midstream. Somebody might say, well, why would FERC allow us to do that now midstream? And the reason they would allow us to do this midstream is because we've had some unforeseen circumstances. One is that huge flood, which damaged the dam. So that kind of changed everything. That's one thing that changed in the game board. Two, we have worked very closely with FERC's departments, the three agencies, and developed very good relationships. We do have trust amongst each other. That doesn't mean they're going to do everything we want to do exactly, but we do have a relationship good enough in place now that submitting this amendment midstream would be considered. They told us they would consider it. So the circumstances have changed in the fact that we've had a major event, and we've really cemented the relationships with them, and they do trust us. Lesley, am I speaking correctly on that?
Yep, and part of it too is timeline. So part of it, when we first had this discussion, even before we started the relicensing process and tried to separate the two, it was just a little bit too far out, to start talking about decommissioning and removal, with the idea of wanting to continue to generate power and operate Powell Falls, and that was very much part of the city's decision. So short of taking out the generation, FERC wasn't willing to take that piece off and say, hey, we're going to delay, consider it separate or amend it to delay further down the road. But part of its timeline, part of it, yeah, the dam and the damage, or the flood and the damage to the dam, I think certainly has changed the course of that discussion, I think, more than anything at this point. So
I got a question, Mr. Mayor. So there was a dam removed in the upper Willow River above the state park and above Burkhart that I used to ice fish above when I was a kid. They removed that, and there's a lake bed that sits right above that where the old bridge used to sit, and now the new bridge goes there. Was that out by the game farm out there? Is that lake bed, did they do any sediment removal out of that, or was that literally just seeded and kind of left alone? Does anybody on the call know? Maybe DNR? I don't know.
Are you talking about the Mounds one? I think it was called the Mounds Dam. I think that was the one upstream of the Little Falls one, right?
Yeah, if you go north at Burkhart, just north of it, there's a farm right there. And right across the street is a little parking area and some trails.
Sure. So, yeah, so I think sorry to interrupt you. The two dams, I think, that were removed, I don't think it was at the same time, and this was before my time, I apologize. But it was the Mounds Dam and the Willow Falls Dam. I think both dams were upstream of it. And I'm not sure exactly what all occurred, you know, with the removals of those. Again, it was before my time, but yeah, I can't really, I guess, answer that question if there was any sort of management or anything at that time. Unless...
Yeah, I just remember it being taken out. I don't remember a lot of excavation equipment when I was a boy in there, but obviously I was younger and probably didn't pay a lot of attention to it either. And I kind of put you on the spot there, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
It
was
looks
that in the...
great today. You can walk down in there. It's not, you know, that's why I was kind of curious if anybody on the call might have known.
Yeah, I think that was in the 90s too that was removed, correct?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Mr. Stafford, I'm sorry.
Sorry, this is Kellen again. Getting back to something that Chris had touched on with me just briefly as far as the cost goes. I know we're talking about lots of grants and money is here and money is there and apply for this and that and everything. If none of the grants materialize and it goes back to the cost, I mean, the dams are going to come out, you know, regardless. Ultimately, how does this get paid for? Because it wasn't that long ago that this group was also together discussing the, you know, the biosolids discussion. And that's, I mean, literally just millions of dollars are coming down the pipe as far as expenses go in one way or another. And just wondering how, I mean, if this doesn't happen, and I know everybody's just excited to throw money at this, but if it doesn't happen, because I mean, things have happened, like clearly no one expected a pandemic, which impacted state budgets, people's stocks, lots of different things that normally would have given. Just wondering, like, how does this get taken care of?
So I'll speak to that. So this ultimately is a electric utility responsibility. And I guess ultimately, if no money came in, it would be a ratepayer, not a taxpayer, but electric ratepayer funded activity. If no money came in. Unless somebody wants to correct that, Scott, but I believe that's the fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think the context, though, I don't care to rehash the entire decision of the community, but the electric ratepayers and the utility were on the hook whether we take the dams out or leave them in. So if the community is determined to continue to produce electric power, we had millions of dollars of expenses to budget for, figure out, and recoup in the rates. If we did, and which we did, decide as a community to take them out, we have millions of dollars of expenses to do that. Under the scenario of continuing to operate hydro, there is no line of people offering to assist us in finding funding. So under the removal, there is a line, and it is correct that they have not shown up with briefcases of cash to date. But that's our only option, is the line of people interested in supporting this. So again, respectfully, it's been clear all along that the electric utility is responsible for either the maintenance and continuation of hydroelectric production in the dams or removal. At this point, we're talking about what's the most efficient, path forward. So ratepayers absolutely are on the hook for anything that's required by a regulatory agency, whether it's the DNR under 31 or a FERC under their statute. And so whatever they tell us we have to pay, we have to pay. And the likeliest source is the electric utility. However, there's a mix already of city funding sources for different things. So if there's stormwater work, it may be stormwater utility. If it's armoring the wastewater pipes coming into the plant, we're likely to think about using the wastewater utility. And so any grant money or what I'd consider non-local, non-utility source funding would reduce those impacts on the rates. And it's going to be, to your point, Mr. Wells, Mangold, it's going to be a lively capital improvement projects plan. discussion because there is always lots of big competing and sometimes parallel, non-competing priorities for cities' cash. So we're gonna have to do that regardless. And I would, so just as an editorial, I will be your staff person suggesting that I don't necessarily believe trading FERC for NR31 is all upside. I think both parties have been fairly accommodating and professional with us. But I think control is the right word to use. I do think it's who has control. I don't think that's too strong of a word. I know Lesley and Pete may not want to use that word because they have to deal with the DNR and FERC every day. But control is about who gets to decide what muscle study we do or what muscle study we don't. And there's some trade-offs. I think what's been put in line or forwarded by the consultants and staff does make a lot of sense. And Kevin kind of beat around the bush a little bit. I don't know if he meant to do that, but this idea of decoupling the dams was talked about way before we even started this, and FERC was not interested, and DNR generally was interested but didn't see a path for us. That's how I remember it 2.5, 3, 4 years ago. So Lesley's been able to bring this back up as an option. It's not really a new option. It's an old option with new interest and potentially some willingness by the regulatory agencies that we didn't, at least I didn't see before. So if we can do it like we have all along this project, we're blazing new trail for everybody. This isn't the way FERC likes to do things. It isn't the way the DNR likes to do things, but we keep telling them that this is the way River Falls is going to do things. And so far they've kind of gone along. So I don't see any, and others would have experience with this. Those of you who have been in this process for a while, there are trade-offs between FERC and the DNR having control. And there are other ways to get the municipal dam grant program to cover our dam, like suggesting that the legislature change NR 335, which right now excludes us, but it doesn't, there isn't anything in the statutes that exclude us. It's just a DNR code that I saw that excludes us from this grant program. So there might be other options, even if we stay with FERC to try to get the DNR money. But obviously if DNR is the one in charge of making the decision and we get a legislative change, they may not like that. And then you may have to get an earmark or something to compel the DNR to give us the money. The path of least resistance is the one outlined, which is change the label of the dam and work with them on this $400,000 plus opportunity. So not to belabor things, but that just wanted to provide those observations.
That's good clarity, Scott. Appreciate that. I know Mark Spafford had his hand up. Do you still have a question, Mark?
Yeah. I think this is good that I follow up behind Scott, because I guess my comments that I'm going to direct are towards Scott and the council. I think the UAB has spoken pretty direct. First thing I want to start out with is dam removal and restoration projects. They frequently require as much expertise and diplomacy as science. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is lowered Lake Louise was to inspect the Powell Dam. And Pete has been very clear that there is no structural deficiency in this dam. Okay, the second point that I want to make is the city council promised the citizens that the hydro would run until removal and restoration until 2027. I would like to hear somebody from the council speak to that tonight. Number 3 point is there's no restoration plan that I have seen or I've heard of on the table or even in the works of what the dam area is going to look like and what the restoration of the river is going to look like. And The fourth point is, it's a very important aspect of this entire thing is who's got the money. And I was taken a little aside by what Mr. Watson said is when I've been going along this whole time thinking this was going to be private funds, no local funds, and that our utility buyers aren't going to be slapped with this expensive bill. And now I heard we're getting the money from the legislature. Well, where's the money from the legislature coming from? Us. And I heard we're getting a grant from the DNR. Where is that money coming from? Us. What happened to the private funds that we originally heard? So if I look at Pete's, and Pete, I respect you and Lesley to, I just love to listen to both of you because you're both such experts. But we have 1 through 5, repair, refill, leave as is, do nothing is totally irresponsible in my eyes. I don't think anybody wants to see 40,000 cubic yards of sediment flowing down the Kinney and destroying the trout stream and the St. Croix. Number 3 involves the money, and number 4 and 5 I would throw out because you can't just let something be out of control. So I've thrown some on the table. I would like to hear some people respond to my comments. I'm in favor of only number 1 because we have no plan, and that still allows for the removal of the dam in the future, and we can come up. We can do this because time is working with us.
I'll make some comments. I appreciate your point
Pat
of
had his
view.
hand up then too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
right,
I
go ahead.
appreciate your point of view, Mark, but here's the thing. The council also passed a resolution regarding the dam that we've called it a do not resuscitate order. Recognizing that we would, in an ideal situation, the dam would continue to run with little to no repair. And we've got, option number 1, I've got to find that chart, whatever it was, comes out to be about $100,000. That exceeds what the council's intent was for a do not resuscitate order. I mean, we had a $15,000 bent shaft, and I know the utility workers don't like me, something was off with the turbine, and we agonized over $15,000 whether or not we wanted to fix that. So that, I guess, in the context of what you're talking about, is there. I do agree. I do agree with the common theme in the utility meetings about who's going to pay for this. And I think the frustration is, and I don't mean any disrespect to the stakeholders, but I think the frustration that's coming out of the UAB is we're getting told all the stuff that we have to do by these shareholders, and we're not seeing any support. And we're being told, well, you're going to have to tell us what time it is, and then get the money. I think we need something a little bit more. We're being asked to go out on a limb here and make a decision. I think these stakeholders are going to need to go out on a limb and commit a little something more than just conveying their wishes to us in a fairly forceful way sometimes. I think that they need to take that step. It's got to happen because I frankly am getting a little tired of being told what I have to do and muscle studies and all these other things, which frankly I don't feel very good about. But that has to happen. The stakeholders have got to step up with something in a written form that says we will go out and get these funds or do something. And to your point, Mark, we were told there's a whole bunch of private money funds out there. I'm a little concerned about. I don't know that I'm in favor of number 1. I don't think I want to see us refill the basin. I think we saw enough sediment go downstream. And my question, though, that I was going to ask earlier when Pete was talking, is Pete, if we don't pull back these banks and we do get another rain, and we don't do option 4 or 5 where we lose control, we're going to get river bounce. And how far back do we need to pull those banks back? Because the basin filled up and rewatered the whole impoundment anyway. So I guess I'm a little confused on that one. If you could speak to that really quickly, I think you understand. I see you shaking your head a little bit, but I think you understand the point I'm making is we can maybe do a little bit of gate maintenance and some different things there, but I don't know how we're going to be able to avoid a river bounce. And unless we go and drain the thing out, we're going to get some sediment that goes in there. And again, I think that's everybody's biggest concern.
Yeah, I think if you look at the picture in whole, you either manage the sediment in the lake or you manage the sediment below the dam. Right now, a lot of the sediment is below the dam in the first pool. You know, there's an option that we go ahead and spend some money in 2021 putting in access down to the bottom there and starting to at least make an effort to clean up some of that sediment that's down below the dam. And we could maintain probably the sediment coming through the dam from the downstream. If you're going to maintain the sediment in the upstream, it's probably going to have to happen in January or February of next winter. So you probably lost your opportunity this winter because of the time to bid to get workers out there. But your banks that you're looking at steepest, you know, three horizontal to 1 vertical, so 1 on 3, maybe as flat as 1 on 5. You know, you can't have steep banks because those are the first things that wash into the river when it bounces. The flatter the bank, the more resilient it is to the bounce.
Sure, and I understand that. My question is that how far back do we need to pull those if we have another 2-inch rain event, or God forbid another 8 or 10-inch rain event? I mean, that basin's going to fill up, and the banks, unless we pull the whole thing out, it isn't going to matter how far we pull back the banks or whatever grade we give it, a 3-to-1 grade. It's going to fill up with water, and the sediment's going to become mobile again, isn't it?
It's not as mobile. So yeah, if you were to grade those banks back 4-to-1, so that's basically pulling. Right now, say it's a 10-foot cut. That's 40 foot of excavation on each side. You know, so like again, we've been Trout Unlimited came up with this 55-foot wide base channel, 4-to-1 side slopes. Look, that's not a small quantity. You're talking 15,000, 20,000 yards here, right? So it's a significant quantity of.
And then we talked about, and I think this is more curiosity, and I apologize if this is going to drag out the conversation, and maybe it's too much detail, but how in the world are we going to get something down, a crane down there, for instance, if we look at taking out the turbine? I've been down there enough times. I know the terrain. I don't know how in the world we're going to get a crane down there with all the canopy cover and all the other stuff and the grade of that path to get that thing out of there, much less get down and do any sediment removal below the dam. I mean it's more or less a canyon down there.
I think you're going to be happy with Pete's. I think you're going to be happy with Pete's answer about the turbine, but maybe not so much about getting sediment. Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, the turbines are pretty fun to watch. Those guys, they're amazing. I mean, I would almost bet they don't use a crane. They'll use the block and tackles. They'll have an I-beam fastened to the ceiling. Basically, they're going to cut the turbine at the top and bottom, use a block and tackle to pull it up and set it off to the side, maybe chain it to the wall. So that turbine removal is probably an internal powerhouse work. The gate removal could be done with an A-frame hoist the same way. So I think there's ways to get around that equipment. It's probably more old-fashioned methods of repair. I completely agree, though, that the downstream channel is tough to access. And I know Bartosh Canyon is not ideal because of that stormwater pipe, but you could timber mat that. You could cut the bank back down there and put in an access road. And honestly, this is money that you will probably have to spend. So when you come to removing this, say you waited till 2024, you still need to access turbidity barriers and stuff like that down below the dam to maintain them. So I don't think that money put into Bartosh Canyon access is wasted. I think you're just spending it earlier than you would have.
Okay, thank you.
Hal, you had your hand up.
Yep.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you. I think that would be my point as well, in advocating for option number 3, and that is, let's put money where we're going to have to spend it anyway, where we've already committed to doing the work. We're going to have to do some mitigate. We're going to have to do some dredging or some work on the impoundment or on the to pull those stream banks back. We're going to have to do that anyway, one way or the other. So we either do it now or we do it later. And I think option 3 gives us the most flexibility. We have the repair needs are the lowest on option 3. We're not repairing a dam that then we're just going to tear down, in terms of the actual structure of the dam itself. Overall, we're not spending $100,000 on something like that. And then I would also say that we have this partnership with the DNR. Kind of, we're beginning to take these steps, and the DNR has fabulous crews that do stream bank restoration all over the state, and they've done it on the north end of the Kinney, also on the South Fork, and these guys are artists, with the way they do this work. And I just think that we are beginning to kind of come to a place where we can have a real rapport with the DNR, and there's some good possibilities there that could be reasonably priced given what we're looking at. And then the third thing, just to respond to Mr. Spafford's comments, and Mr. Morset, I take your comments in good faith too. I mentioned the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and potential legislative action, but there are also private monies out there that the stakeholders have been engaging with those folks. Again, they want us to know. I agree, Mr. Morset, that and with everybody that we need to start seeing something in writing. But remember, our timeline wasn't to do this until 2024, 2026. So all of this has been kind of compressed, and those asks weren't really scheduled to happen right now or in the last 8 months or since this summer. Those asks were scheduled to happen in the next 24 months. So the relationship building is what's been happening and all of that kind of thing. So I would just say, everybody's doing their best. I think there's a lot of good communication going on. I'm looking hard at option 3 right now. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Diane. Diane had her hand up.
Yeah, I just want to jump back in time a little bit to something Mr. Spafford said about funds used for this project. And I just looked up a resolution from February of 2018, which said that we will establish a fiscally responsible financing plan, and that fiscally responsible financing means no use of local general property tax levy. And the city has more resources at its than just the property tax levy, and that certainly does not exclude getting state funds to help with this project. So I just wanted to stick that in there.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Gagne.
Kind of like we've heard here, Diane brings up a great point. I remember voting in that. I remember a conversation of utility rate funds being a portion of that, potentially. I remember Friends of the Kinney coming out swinging against the city council and the city on this, and one of them got elected to city council and thought we were going to magically come remove some dams. This is a great time for that organization to show the effort that they put behind its movement of getting signatures from people across this nation, and emails that came in from people across the nation. Time to step up. If you guys are really passionate about removing these dams, it's a great opportunity to get your name behind something and put some funds behind it. Let's do some fundraising. Let's make sure that we're stepping up. American Rivers said from the Friends of the Kinney that we have one of the most endangered rivers. If that's truth, let's step up and do some fundraising and get this dam removed in a timely fashion. If we're going to step up, let's do it. I don't think the taxpayers of River Falls need to be putting all the money in this. If it's a national asset, let's step up as a nation and take out a dam and make it healthy for fishers, for the fisheries and the environment. I think that's a great call for you folks to step up.
I see Judy Babcock. She made some comments in the chat section of our meeting to kind of give an update of what the KCC and TU has been working on. So if you want to go read those. And Mr. Gagne, I still get a few of those straggler letters that come in once a month.
Okay, any other questions? I can't see everybody.
Mr. Mayor, just to back to Mr. Spaffer's question, I think was the timing too on our dam. We were not anticipating, at least staff has never been under the impression based on the resolution passed by council that we were producing electric past 23. So the timeline we're talking about, this do not resuscitate kind of question is, do we want to try to get 2 more years out of the, will 2 more years of electric revenue justify the kind of the additional cost over these other options? The difference between option 3, I guess, and option 1, so to speak, is it justified for that additional couple of years of electric revenue? The target date that staff has been operating under for removal and associated stream restoration is 2026. So the target date was set. Our marching orders were 2026 is the target. And staff, when we're working on the fiscally responsible financing plan, part of it is we absolutely are counting on privately raised and not but state and federal resources to do the stream restoration portion of the project. The staff has been pretty clear, I think, at all the public meetings that our aim in doing the capital improvement planning and other things related to financing for it, we're focused almost entirely on the bare minimum regulatory required removal and restoration of the area immediately around and adjacent to the dam. The Kinney Corridor project, obviously, and the resolution encompasses way more projects than that. And those are the ones that, frankly, staff hasn't got any direction from council or others to put any associated electric utility, stormwater, and others towards doing those projects. So we're focused, on that side of thing. And this really is that this is that expenditures over 5,000 issue that when they passed that resolution in February 2018, that was the discussion was, well, this doesn't mean we will do whatever it takes to keep electric being produced. On the other hand, we had reasonable estimate that we wouldn't have to spend a whole lot of money. Although I remember lots of public statements from engineers and others that, we had, everything was with an asterisk. There could be some catastrophic failure of the hydro and it wouldn't make sense to fix the generator. because even small repairs are usually in the $5,000 to $10,000 range. We've been lucky to do a bunch of their expenses with our own staff, which has kind of kept us out of the conversation. But I don't think we're going to be able to meet FERC's expectations to repair it with our own staff good enough to let us do the hydro production. So but I agree. I think your first statement, Mr. Spafford, was the best one. This is all about diplomacy. I mean, this is pretty significant effort on all of your parts to bite your tongue every once in a while and say your piece every once in a while, and then we're trying to extend our hands to people that sometimes aren't always showing us as much love as we think we ought to get. And that, I guess, is the essence of diplomacy, is trying to figure out how to work through all this. The engineers give us great answers all the time. Every time we ask a question, we get some great answers from them, and they're not ambiguous, which I have appreciated during this process. They've given us pretty straight answers, but maybe this is the point in the meeting to understand from a straw poll perspective if there's anybody that would like to pursue 4 and 5, option 4 or 5, or if that really is kind of off the table with the group.
Can I chime in quickly? Just want to make sure I understand things.
Please go ahead, Patrick.
Yep.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Patrick.
So I like to think I'm pretty good at connecting the dots, and I want to throw out my overview, starting with sharing the concerns of Mark and Kellen of getting the cart before the horse, or the chicken and egg argument as Hal presented it. And then Hal, you sounded very optimistic, and I see both those sides. The last time we meet, we certainly discussed finances, and I felt from the two Scotts that we feel like we're in a good position. And one of the things that it hasn't been said tonight is we were discussing a long time ago what could happen if a historical artifact was found, or if there was an issue with the mussel studies. And we maybe aren't past every obstacle that could really cause us a major roadblock, but we've gotten through these studies without having to say the words $5 million, which really is something to celebrate. We're looking at 1.1 versus 1.5 type numbers, and it's big, but as Scott pointed out, we're spending the money one way or the other. And this is, the more we do this, the more I'm thinking, at least we're in this spot instead of a worse one. And I'm really happy about that. So I want to move slow, like Mark, but I went and saw the dam and almost saw the joy on Kevin's face at the opportunity to move ahead. Hey, things are happening anyway. And I've got to put those two together. And I just, hearing that repairing it is maybe impractical, I guess I'd say my big frustration is I still am with Kellen on, I'd like to have the money committed before we spend it. But I think I have to rely on the city being in a good financial situation to where we can confidently move ahead. I think that's the best we can call it. And I just want to share that as my understanding and see if that's how everyone else took it, or if I need to revise that somewhere.
I'm trying to call this making lemonade out of lemons, Patrick. I mean, we had that terrible historic flood, but really it did provide us with an opportunity to where we are today. And it may have saved us a little bit of money as well.
Mr. Mayor, if I can make just a real quick comment.
Yes.
I totally respect what Mr. Simpson just said. And I guess the gist of what I said was exactly what Patrick is saying. Just slow the process down and let's see some things evolve through this. If the hydro did run for another year or two, we're looking at what, $30,000 to $40,000 a year. We could potentially make that repair on the wing wall, and we could do some repair on the gate, and we could do exactly what we're probably looking at doing in number 3. That's all I wanted to say. It's just things like they seem like they're just happening because they're happening, and I'm just not comfortable with that. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Is there anybody else? Yep, Mr. Plunkett. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, just to answer Mr. Simpson's question, I'm really not fully understanding some of the implications of why we wouldn't be eligible for the DNR grant if we go with some variation on number 4. And then we were told that we don't need to bring down a crane to pull the turbine, but we now do need to cut a hole in the powerhouse wall. I'm sort of confused on that. So I would like to at least keep some potential for that and looking at the option of adding that new flow opening due to its lower refill risk of the leak. And I would want more information on that essentially before I do that to answer, before I rule that out to answer Mr. Simpson's question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Anybody else have comments about that? There again, I can't see everybody, so.
Mr. Mayor? If I could make one comment from option 1, I think one thing that may not have been talked about yet is if you refill this lake. So what happened in October, it happened. And you can blame a lot of that on whatever, Mother Nature you want to blame that on. But it will probably not be as graceful of a permission next time. And that caution comes into this. I have a line in number 1 of dredging. And the reason that's in there is because I'm not sure that there's enough stomach in the stakeholders in the community to allow what happened in October to repeat itself. So that there's a risk that if you refill this lake and you don't drain it until 2024, so you got 3 more years of sand coming in and filling back in that channel, there's a risk that the agencies might say it's too much risk. You're going to have to pre-dredge that channel before you draw it down again. That's why that cost in number 1 is there. It may be just on my end of being too conservative and saying, I'm worried about how the agencies reacted to the last time, and I'm projecting that, but there's a risk that if you refill this, you put sediment back in that pond, that you will not be able to do what happened in October. And Scott's right, that it's diplomacy. It was a fortunate event almost, because we had permission from the FERC to draw it down and inspect it. I'm not so certain that we're going to have the grace next time to do that same thing.
Mr. Mayor?
Okay, yep, go ahead.
So I'm kind of leaning towards option number 3 at the moment. However, I think Mark brought up a really good point when he talked about how the council as a whole made a promise to the ratepayers here. And I think maybe part of that diplomacy might be having a city staff added to the fundraising committee. And I'm just curious what the rest of the council, how they would feel about that.
About city staff fundraising?
No, having a city staff member added to the Kinney Corridor Collaborative Committee.
I think we're trying to, I think at the beginning of that, we wanted to step away from that. They're their own committee.
Would there be,
they're also their own,
my question for Scott Simpson, I guess, would be, would there be any advantages of having a person who could help give oversight if we were to go with option 3?
Yeah, I mean, we're actively engaged with the Kinney Collaborative currently, so I'm not sure that I would advise you that some formal appointment of a city staff person or council member would necessarily change the dynamic, because I think they've been pretty transparent in telling us what their strategy is, who they're talking to, and how things are moving along. So that's probably a policy decision for the council if you wanted to try to ask them to do that. But I think at this point, I'm not sure I could advise that I would see it change in that. I do think it's true that it's frustrating to hear people say, don't worry, there'll be money, and not see it. But it's also true, because I've heard that from this group, but it's also true what I've heard from the KCC is we need a little bit more definition of what we're doing in order to be able to target our requests for the funders. And I think a good example of that is, as soon as we had lots of conversations with the Army Corps of Engineers leading up to our discussions with FERC, but the Army Corps continued to say to us throughout that year and a half or so, you'll have to come talk to us once we know exactly what studies you're going to do. And once we had the approved study plan, then the Army Corps jumped right to action and did what they said they would do. Now, I don't know that all these other potential funders will do what they said they will do, but I have to believe that some of them will. And so we are working on the restoration plan and the decommissioning plan right now, but I think our engineering staff, hired engineering staff, is kind of waiting for this inflection point to say, are we gonna, it'll be one thing if we fill everything back up and fix the dam, and it'll be another thing if we try to take it out right away, and it'll be a third thing if we have something in between, which is what option 3 is. So I think they probably are cheating a little bit and working towards option 3. If I were them, that's what I would have been doing at my desktop. But because we have to produce some stuff for FERC here and potentially for the DNR, I suppose. But that's where we're at we are working actively on a decommissioning and restoration plan. We are talking about whether we have to armor the sewer pipes. We are talking about what the bank height's going to be at the sewer plant. We are looking at the bridge posts, abutments, and trying to figure out where that is. We are trying to think about the downstream sediment. So we're thinking about those as your city staff, and then our hired staff are, starting to actually put that into writing. But they need some decision from us about what direction we're going to go. And then I think it's fair that the funders are saying we need to know a little bit where you're going. There's very few funders I've found in my 20 years that say, I just believe in your idea so much, I'm going to give you the money and you can tell me what you're going to use it for, without a plan. So right now, I think some of those funders rightly are waiting, but I definitely understand the frustration of, there felt like there was this momentum in the community to go forward with this because we felt there would be so much support for local property taxes. And I still think that's likely. And we've already seen that evidence with the Army Corps for one. I mean, one group has already stepped up and said, we'll assist you with this process. And I don't think they would have if we were just relicensing the 2 hydro dams and continuing to operate those for the next 20 years. The Army Corps wouldn't have given us a planning assistance grant, I don't believe. But that doesn't discount the point about this is all our money, because that's true. I mean, we pay federal income taxes and state income taxes, and that's money but the resolution and what we've been saying for a long time is local property tax is what the council does not want to spend on nice to haves around the restoration of the corridor. The must haves, the stuff that we're going to be required, we have to spend. So I guess that's my thought on that.
Yeah, I want to just build on that real quick, Scott. So Trout Unlimited, as well as the KCC, have sent some private messages kind of outlining what they're doing as far as fundraising and whatnot. They're listening now. I would just encourage both Trout Unlimited and KCC to give a formal update to the UAB and the council to let them know where they're at. I don't want to reread their note to me because I might mischaracterize it. So if you want to give the update to the UAB and council, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. More questions. Do we have more questions or comments?
This is Tim Toom here. I think my video is off, but can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you, Tim.
Sure. Well, to Mark's point, if we were going to go to option one to refill the basin, we're going to be in either an option 2 or 3 mode for probably at least a year while those repairs are being made, is the way I look at that. And so we're losing the option to produce enough revenue from that hydro, I think, is just pointing to diminishing returns. That's why we voted and concluded that anything over $5,000 had to be approved, because we just weren't going to put any money in that. So that's already been stated. It just looks to me like we stick with option 3, and then we just try to push the timeline on option 5, because we know it has to happen sooner or later. Let's try to make it happen sooner. Because that's my perspective.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, looking for hands again. So, Kevin, when will this be coming in front of everybody?
I don't know, Scott and I talked about this. I guess tonight, what we're kind of looking for tonight is some stop signs. I mean,
Okay.
you know, we have our expert engineers and consultants and stakeholder groups and agency groups, and we're all trying to get them in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. We're pretty close to that right now. I'm looking for somebody in this group, in the policymaker level, that's going to throw up a stop sign and say, wait a minute, this isn't where we want to go with this. I think we are headed towards option 3. I think it's the most environmentally and fiscally responsible. Unless someone in this group here is not in favor of that, or a group of people and say, wait a minute, we need to move a different direction. Because if we do option 3 and we want to move ahead with this, we have to move relatively quickly. We heard it's going to take 12 to 14 months at FERC. We're trying to, time this for winters and other things. So unless you want to see it in some formal way, we can bring that back to you. But otherwise, I'd kind of like to move ahead with option 3 and re-engage FERC and the Department of Hydro Administration and Compliance, and ask for an amendment to our existing license and remove a turbine to allow water to flow. Start working with Trout Unlimited and the KCC on decommissioning plans, a more robust plan and funding. So that's where my mind is at, unless somebody's thinking differently.
Okay, so I'd like to hear from the council members on their thoughts on this. Go ahead, Ms. Odine.
Oh, thanks. I'll start. I think what Kevin laid out sounds like a good way to move forward to me. Yeah, the flood happened. It's, frankly, we might be looking at a lot of these options, even if we never thought about removing Powell Dam, because it's a structure that has outlived its usefulness. So I think option 3 gives us the opportunity to, mitigate as much as we can, more silt, more sediment going downstream. And getting out from underneath FERC gives us some state options that we didn't have otherwise, and probably more options going forward. So I think that's a step in a good direction.
Okay. Who else on the council? Hal, we know you want number 3, right?
I think that's the one that makes the most sense to me right now. Yes.
Okay. Who's next on the council? And I can't see all of you, so go ahead and speak up. I can see Sean. I can see Scott.
I see Mr. Beershad.
I
think 3 makes the most sense to me.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Plunkett?
Mr. Mayor, I think I'd have to defer to the engineer here, who has a much greater idea than I do about some of these. I still am not understanding why we can't do a larger opening there. But that's because I simply don't understand it. I am sure that these are issues that the engineer does. Option 4 lists some things like if we put in that larger opening, we'd have to cut a hole in the powerhouse wall and some other things that I don't understand how that's construed with a larger opening, but that's because I don't understand. I'm sure that the engineers do, and I'm going to defer to them with option 3 on this. Although I do have concerns about, you have another 8-inch rainfall, the potential catastrophic failure of that after a refill. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Downing.
Well, from what I can tell, option 3 leaves us with the best sustainability for the environment and sustainability financially. Although I personally would like to see more oversight from the city, I would agree with it. And I think the council can discuss if we need it more in the future or not, depending on how we feel as a group. So I'm leaning, I'm in favor of 3.
Okay. Mr. Gagne or Mr. Morissette, any thoughts?
I've talked enough tonight. Number 3.
Okay. Mr. Gagne? You there, Chris? Did we lose Chris?
Hold on one second.
Oh, there he is.
Mr. Mayor, I'm actually had to step away here for a minute.
Okay. We're just kind of seeing if everybody's on board with number 3.
Number 3, yes, sir.
Okay.
I gotta go.
Okay. So I get Kevin. I guess 3 is the winner. If that's
It's very helpful. I'll just say that. I know Scott has done a lot of work with you individually and one-on-ones discussing this. I mean, I have been talking to my utility advisory board. I think there's a few people on that advisory board that maybe feel a little more strongly about considering to produce electricity for a little bit longer. But in all, I think option 3 is where we need to head unless somebody wants to just seriously throw a stick in the spokes. And I think that's the direction we're going to be heading. So.
Okay.
Scott, am I speaking out of turn on that, or is that kind of your feeling too, Mr. Simpson?
No, I think that's what I've heard consistently from the UAB and the council, the meetings that I've attended or watched. I would suggest for the community and the UAB in particular, probably the next decision for the UAB to try to position themselves or advocate on behalf of the utility is that whole speed thing and the urgency. Because I think you can make a good argument that even if we go with number 3, that maybe we don't worry if we make the DNR's $400,000 grant cycle for this first grant, that really we should stick with the timing that we originally had, and that would mean we'd go for that next grant cycle that the DNR has and lining up. So I mean, I'm not suggesting that's what I'm in favor of. I would like myself to take some more time to look at the different things, but if we go with option 3, you still have kind of option 3A and B, and 3A is, in my mind, status quo. You take as much time as necessary, you work this process through, and you follow the resolution timeline pretty closely. Option 3B is kind of what's outlined by Mr. Toom, which would be you're doing option 3, but you're keeping option, this 5, moving faster towards the resolution. I guess you would be, if you wanted to advocate that, UAB or others, you would, or not, you would be basically coming down to that. Whereas number 3, which talks about the target date of 2026, and you would be advising the council whether you think they should just leave that alone and kind of work backwards, or if you would want to take the opportunity now, given that we're not going to produce hydro, if you'd want to, move that timeline up. And frankly, the funders could also help influence that by if they produce some money that you say would benefit by moving sediment or other things, and they could come up with $1.5 million, but only if it was used in 24, then I guess UAB would have to consider that and make a recommendation to the council. But staff would take what we heard tonight as option 3, but a pretty traditional, in my mind, a traditional approach to option 3, which is we're going to take the engineer's recommendation. We're going to work on this NR 31 process, but we're still looking really at that the major restoration and all that, kind of as Pete laid out, a little bit farther than maybe people are thinking today. You know, this is not a 2021 stream restoration. This is a 2021, what do we call it, Pete? Armor. We're going to armor and prepare. We're gonna get ourselves ready, but the big money we would still be thinking is 23, 24, 25, not in 21, and maybe not even in 22. So that's how I take what I heard tonight, and then we would be looking for any feedback at the next UAB if you think that's not what you wanted us to hear as staff. And same with council, I suspect could tell us at their next meeting or a following meeting that that's not what we should have heard.
Scott,
so Kevin will put something together. Kevin doesn't know that yet, but Kevin will put something together summarizing with Lesley and Pete kind of exactly how they understand our path forward. They've laid it out in some good PowerPoint slides, but we'll want to lay that out a little bit more carefully. And then we will bring that back for council and UAB, at least at a minimum as an informational item, so that you can kind of look at that and shake your head yes or violently nod no, or however you think you need to react. But that'll give us good feedback as staff on where we go next. And we still have to get FERC to agree that it makes sense, and we also have to agree internally that we're comfortable pushing it to the NR 31 dam, which I think we are, but we'll be doing more due diligence as your staff.
Okay. Scott, you covered it well. I want to add one caveat to what Scott said is we are going to probably not have a lot of large expenses in 21, 22, maybe more in 23, 24, 25. But the one wild card really is sediment management. You know, what will we be required to do? Do we need to build a road down Bartosh Canyon, do sediment management? That is, to me, the wild card, which could be a little bigger ticket item that we'd have to do earlier rather than later. But that's still a question mark. So I just wanted to get that out there for people's ears.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay. Is everybody okay with everything? We're good to go? Yep. Mr. Bierstead? Well, I just want to tell everybody thanks for...
You're muted. You're muted.
No, I'm not.
Todd was.
Oh,
you
Todd
wanted
was.
me to. I thought you wanted me to move to adjourn.
Oh, well, there is no adjourning this. No, sorry. I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to come over tonight. Thanks for all the guests. Thanks for all the special people that came and helped with this. I appreciate everybody's time and effort on this. So we will all talk to you soon.
I'll second that. A lot of heavy lifting. Great job, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night now.
Bye now.
Good night.